So this is Andy Loukes. Here we talk to us about enabling a partnership between industry, law enforcement, academia, and government. ACE's Economic Crime Campaign. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Hugo. Okay, so yeah, one of the big questions that's asked inside government is how to harness the investment by industry and research from academia to accelerate progress in government policy in a way that has a positive mission impact. The accelerated capability environment was created by the Office for Security and Counterterrorism, which is now the Homeland Security Group, in 2017. And that was to address the concern that the environment for changing policy and transforming technology wasn't getting the best out of industry and academia, being risk averse, unambitious, and occasionally ill-informed. So ACE is all about easing the process through a range of enablers across sort of commercial, technical, and access to a pre-existing community of companies and academics. Our bread and butter are in taking commissions, typically aimed at learning something in 3 months from a public sector organization, and working with industry and academia to produce something that informs a decision. This might be to understand if a technology can really assist, such as categorizing child sexual abuse images using machine learning, or to demonstrate that you can integrate more mature technology from other domains into operational processes, such as data science to identify vehicles worthy of further investigation based on movement patterns. Often we produce an alpha prototype which forms the core of a procurement for a live product, instead of the sort of traditional ITT process. ACE recognizes that sometimes waiting for a public sector organization to realize or identify a problem to take to our community can actually miss opportunities. And additionally, the more strategic public safety and security challenges have loads of stakeholders, and that can slow down decision making. So with ACE's community of nearly 300 companies and academics, many of whom are researching, and as we're hearing today and yesterday, and providing services, companies providing services to the public sector and obviously other domains. Campaigns are a way of taking the sort of big strategic problems to our community and working collaboratively to identify initiatives which can inform policy, programs, and provide products which can improve the capability in specific mission areas. So that brings me to our economic crime campaign, which we've been running since the end of 2020. Economic crime is an ideal candidate for a campaign as it's cross-cutting. It's a cross-cutting national security threat. We have a strategic steering group, which has representatives from government policy, people like Duncan Tessier, law enforcement, Ian Dyson, Graham Bigg, and so on, and financial services. So Karen and Brian Dilly there, representing those different areas. Earlier this year, we ran a series of interviews and workshops to understand perspectives across the whole system, from victims, industry, and academia. This produced 5 themes where we think we can make a difference, ranging from very practical sort of short-term things to more strategic. The first one is identity validation and assurance. So where we're looking to work with DCMS to accelerate their program by testing out ideas and facilitating industry input. The digitization of production orders. In fact, we really mean sharing of any personal information between the private sector and public authorities under different legislation. This seems to be an area that's neglected by the economic crime plan, but has the potential to make a really big difference. And our first step is to look at the sort of wider system to make sure that we understand all the components and effects. The victim's journey, obviously a key problem area, and where we're looking at interventions to help victims gain confidence in the system. People skills, training, and tradecraft. And clearly there's a lot of knowledge, but we're looking at making investigations less specialist and working with the NPCC leads, City of London Police, and CIFAS on that. And lastly, pattern recognition, sharing, and use, and I'll come back to that. Another thing is that a fundamental problem is the ability to have a common understanding of what the real practical problems are. So one initiative that we've set up is a model office. ACE is bringing together experienced practitioners to produce scenarios. The scenarios include a narrative. I'm interested in the crime scripting that's been talked about, and I have heard a bit about it, but I don't know much about it. So maybe people can talk about that later. And so we have the narrative, the supporting data, and the test is really that these scenarios are recognizable to their colleagues. Initially, we're using the sort of model office to encourage our industry community to demonstrate how products could be used coherently to pursue economic crime investigations. But you also see this as an environment to test out new ways of working, new technologies, and potentially impact of policy changes going forward. And it's already seeing companies discuss changes to their products to improve interoperability. I wanted to get back to our fifth theme, an area which is a bit more strategic and has a focus on how to enable an understanding of criminal behaviours and the patterns to look for in financial data, and whether that can be shared with financial institutions to improve transaction monitoring for fraud or money laundering and suspicious activity detection and obviously reporting. So at the moment, we're building a coalition of the willing to explore this area, to validate whether it's worth pursuing, and to seek to build a collaborative, community-driven language, much in the same way as the cyber threat intelligence community developed STIX and TAXI. So this idea is in very early stages, but we wanted to take this opportunity to see if it generates any interest in this community from this audience. And if it does, please ask questions now, or you can get in touch with me on the Hopin platform, and my email address is there. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Andy. That was a very interesting subject. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. I don't see any questions.
I have got a little video attached to this. So if you wanted, it's just a 1 minute long thing, just an introduction to something we used as part of the economic crime. So shall I just play that in case people...
Yeah, play that while we wait for questions. I think that'd be a good idea. Sure. Thank you.
Meet Mrs. Thomas. A criminal called her pretending to be from the fraud department of her bank.
Over a third of all crime types are financial based. It actually costs the economy over £37 billion a year.
We really need to dispel the myth that economic crime is victimless. It's not.
Problems are best solved through conversation, and the Economic Crime Campaign has successfully brought together technologists, potential providers of solutions, and subject matter experts.
But it's not what's happening next, it's what's happening now. And we are moving to stage 2 and looking to what we can do to improve the whole economic crime system.
We're able to bring a response to the urgent need to break down the public, private, informational and operational silos across law enforcement and the private sector by working together in this campaign team. The buy-in we have, the participation we have, the contributions that we're seeing from across the public sector and private sector make me think this is where we're going to be able to make a real difference.
That's it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I haven't seen any questions, but I have a question if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Have you seen any limits? Have you seen any pushback from the private sector on sharing their data, or how best to avoid any kind of limitations on that side of things?
So, I mean, it's really interesting. So obviously the main sort of proactive sharing of information is through the SARS regime. But there's lots of sort of pockets in different areas. So I think one of the things that's really interesting that's coming out in our conversation is all the different areas. So there's the sort of money laundering, there's terrorist finance, there's the sort of fraud detection. So they're all seem to be in sort of separate silos, and they've all got slightly different perspectives. And so the boss basically, no, they are keen to share. There is the balance between the enthusiasm to, they want to have customers that are legit. That's something that comes up quite a lot. Whereas in other domains, actually, where they're sharing information with law enforcement, such as communications data, telephone companies are less bothered about the customers. So I think that's an interesting perspective. So that's a program I've worked closely on, and it's quite interesting that different sides of the private sector can have different perspectives. They really want clarity in what they're allowed to do, so that data protection against things like production orders. We're talking about our digital production orders, and then when you've got legal powers to retrieve data. There's so many different things. There's HMRC, DWP, PACE, and terrorist finance. There's different bits of legislation all over the place. So I think they are keen to share. They just they want clarity so that they don't make any mistakes. So it's yeah, no, I think it's definitely an open. It's almost they're very keen.
That's very interesting, because from our discussions at the roundtables, there was definitely this talking of siloing being one of the quite a significant problem. But it's nice to hear that the private sector do actually want to overcome this kind of barrier. They want to share the data. So that's not too big an issue. We have a question from Michael. How difficult was it to pull this network together?
So one of the things with the campaign, as opposed to ACE's normal work where you get paid, is trying to find what's the sort of the motivations, trying to find common goals, and then separate motivations towards that common goal. So it's still quite challenging. We're finding you get different types of companies. So we've got companies participating that are that see a sort of consulting type opportunity. So for example, if we're wanting to produce a standard, someone for exchanging information, they could participate in running that standard. And they might get paid, looking to someone at the Home Office or NEC or somebody to pay for that. And then you have, I think one of the ones that's a bit more interesting, and this has come out with the model office work, has been companies who are trying to sell like an analysis product, either to, at the moment, our sort of, most of our work is done on the law enforcement side. If you're trying to sell an analysis product to law enforcement, it's actually really constrained by the data that goes into it. So you might be able to do a really whizzy demo. It might have amazing capabilities, but if you're being sent a pile of printed transaction records from a bank, getting it into that tool is a challenge. So all of those things are really connected. So there's a motivation there for those companies to help collectively get the get information, for example, into a good format. So trying to work out people's motivations is a trick. So the answer is it's quite hard. We're getting pockets of real enthusiasm. So and ACE's model is generally do something in step by step and like prove it on the way. So we're trying to keep our ambitions relatively low and demonstrate progress. And so I see the question there from Mike there. These things are never technical problems. It's not technical. It is entirely. I can't actually believe it's not happened. So I spent nearly 10 years working on the communications data environment, where we now have a modern REST API for acquiring communications data and for engaging with the authorizing body and so on. It seems obvious. I cannot believe that they don't do that. And so you'll take the process of preparing. So just first of all, deciding that I want financial records to help progress my investigation, writing an application that covers your necessity proportionality in a way that maybe you only do it a few times a year, so you've got to get that right, getting a judge to approve it, getting the request over to a bank and getting it. Each of those steps is fraught with, it's all done based on how they've always done it. And so it's right. That's why we've picked it as it seems to have been missed in the sort of economic crime plan as an opportunity. So that's one we think has real merit. But when you do take a step back, it's quite interesting, because you start going, well, what are we trying to achieve? A transactional, I want these records from Andy Loukes for this time period from Lloyds Bank. You might actually want to share a little bit more about what's actually going on, because the banks will then be able to give you a better answer. So what we're doing right now, and very keen for people to help us on this, is to just take a little bit of a step back and go, what are people trying to achieve? And because it can lead to things like, if you look at the Transaction Monitoring Netherlands, where their banks are putting data into a big pot, but owned by the banks with privacy enhancing technologies, you could solve this problem in quite different ways. So we're at the moment, just before we leap in and go, you can just digitize it. I'll have to get that. So I think we're just at the moment just taking a little bit of a step back, and in the next few weeks we'll have some clarity about what actions we should take. And the other part of it is, I think we're starting to head towards suggesting policy change here. Could you consolidate some of these powers just so it's a little bit easier? So easier for the law enforcement side and easier for the financial institutions.
Great. Thank you very much, Andy.